There was that case where we tweeted out online that the final debate before the amendments were coming through was only attended by 4 TDs. So there's 160 TDs in the Dáil, and everyone knows that when it came to a vote, only 14 voted against and every other TD voted for the legislation. Only 4 were present to hear the arguments to excise Section 10 and a bunch of other amendments which would have removed the sections pertaining to speech, which we think is a bit ridiculous.
I mean, I was listening to your interview on the Niall Boylan show recently.
So why is it happening, Alex? You're from Free Speech Ireland.
And he was saying that he had 2 Fianna Fáil TDs on the show, and he was saying that the ones he had invited on to debate hate speech just wouldn't come on. But he said that he got these in to talk about something else, and he kind of fired the question at them at the end. And they said that they would be voting yes on it, and he asked them if they'd read it, and they said no.
So if anything knows anything about the rigid party system in Ireland, virtually Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, they're dictatorships. You can't deviate from the party line, and if you do, you will lose the party whip, which means you do not get any funding for the next election. And if there's another infraction, you'll be kicked out of the party. This happened to Councillor Brian Murphy a few years ago. And this is nearly what happened to those young Fine Gael members, Brian O'Shea and Cillian Foley-Walsh. Even though that they were not even elected representatives in the party, they still had to toe the line. And attending a speech which had Ben Shapiro at it almost saw them kicked out of young Fine Gael. So you could probably imagine if you are a TD or a senator, if you don't toe the line, if you don't vote as you are directed to by the party whip, you'd be very afraid of your career, you'd be very afraid of what's going to happen in the future. And I think this is the reason why they were asleep at the wheel and they didn't read the legislation, because there's no point. If they had disagreements with it, they weren't allowed to vote no. They weren't allowed to have a vote of conscience like they might have had on, let's say, the abortion legislation that came in. TDs were allowed to vote of conscience on that. They weren't allowed to vote of conscience in the Dáil, and that's why I think they didn't show up to hear the debates, and they only filed in to vote on the legislation when they were told to, which we think is a real problem.